3, 2, 1. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, when the average person watches 500 Days of Summer, they have one of two conclusions. A. Summer is a bitch. She should have gone for Tom. Tom is a good guy. Or 2. Tom is weird. He's an incel. He is using Summer. We think both of these are valid, but imagine the unexplored comparative wherein we see Summer's entire perspective and we get a simple answer which is probably along the lines of she did not see him that way. What you uniquely get coming from our side is an understanding of what stories really are. We tell you, stories like the ones I mentioned, whether fictitious or real, seek to invoke empathy and understanding of characters through their lived experiences. These experiences send narratives that create norms for how we should be or how we should act in a particular situation. Opening government is correct to say that the perspective of the rejector should be validated, but more than just providing an alternative view, they lack the so what answer to that. Opening opposition falls into the same pitfall as opening government and says, oh, we need to have more validations, more experiences for catharsis, catharsis so we feel better. But you have to understand, if you're trying to champion more of this genre, then why are you digging in a very gas and oversaturated narrative? Because if you take a look at all of your examples, they all end up in that idea of this person having to want to prove themselves. I have to go to the gym in order for me to be able to become the better version because that person was mean for being able to reject me. So, we think there's an unexplored idea of really understanding the reason as to why in order to get this idea of closure. It's not about quantity of ideology, but selecting the ones we rather champion, hence the comparative to the word prefers and the word rather in the motion. The path to victory of closing government is simple. Number 1, how do these stories affect individual decisions of people who consume this media? Number 2, how do these stories affect relationships? And by affect relationship, I mean the literal relationship of people experiencing stuff and the narrative of how these relationships affect society. And thirdly, I am going to defend the comparative. I am going to talk to you about the harms of being able to look at the perspective of just the rejected as opposed to looking at it in the perspective of the rejector, which we agree from our opening is not just unexplored, but if you were to look at the comparative, it becomes better in terms of how people treat others and approach particular relationships. My first layer of analysis is establishing a better self-identity and idea of respect and dignity for yourself. This happens when we become more empathetic. Because on side opposition, what happens is that the jock who rejected the country girl from Idaho is automatically seen as a bad guy, he is a dick. Or the hot valley girl who rejected the skinny loser dude is now also a bitch because she doesn't understand his true potential. Comparatively, when we're able to explore the perspective of these people who are rejecting these people, we can get the true closure and truth in terms of what that really is. As opposed to on their side, when it's constantly about the person who got rejected, what do you have? Endless speculation and the presupposition of what had happened. The harm there is that it's a disservice to the very person because you literally lack the perspective and nuance that actually invalidates their actual opinion. And here's the biggest harm. You create an idea of asymmetry wherein you have a victim and an oppression. Yes, Abed, you're saying here, that's your attempt to say, hey bruh, we said all that. But this is me weighing and demonstrating this and how it's more proximate to the idea of the person. What does this do? A, it smears the reputation of the other party, literally through slander, libel, literally being mean to that person because they're unexplored. And B, it just being a huge and gross waste of time because, like what DLO said, you're on this pursuit to be able to want to fucking move on, go to the gym, find someone else, cry and pander to particular individuals. The harm here is, ironically, you don't get that closure on your side because it's always hinged on something outside your locus of control, and that idea of validation is just constantly hinged on something you don't know, as opposed to us, where there's a very clear idea of they probably didn't like you, and that leads to a better sense of understanding na, they didn't like me, that's something I should accept, as opposed to being very self-absorbed. Opening opposition, go for it.
Arguments were about catharsis and growth, which I'm unclear since when did it ever become a bad thing. The motion is about creating content that people like or prefer given it's a THP. Is it worth it to shame people for wanting to read from the perspective of the rejected always?
Because that catharsis, fam, happens at the expense of the other person whose side is unexplored. Hence, literally being able to say, that person, they know good, me, I'm the bad guy. So the point in which people pursue relationships and pursue any kind of social encounter as relating to that or looking at that as a means to an end, that's the point in which you absolutely wreck people's capacity and chance to really become happy in a true relationship. As opposed to on our side, where we're able to desensitize this idea of rejection, understand that it's okay and it's completely valid, and even if it might hurt me now, that's better, as opposed to me trying to chase this what you call cathartic experience for the sake of cinema. We think that on your side, those things are still going to exist, but in terms of a proper literary target market idea, it would be kind of interesting to understand the 500 days of the other individual, or of Autumn or of Tom, as opposed to just looking at it solely through their perspective. What do you uniquely get from our side of the house? You get a clear demonstration of how these things affect individual choices and how those choices have a trickle-down effect on the relationship of people. And you get a flip towards what you get from opening opposition, meaning if you want better cinema, go with an unexplored genre, probably a better upside with regard to people wanting to watch it, as opposed to the gas narratives of all these things and proving and trying to move on that you get in status quo. We are very proud to propose.